Now, one of the questions that always seems to get asked for when it comes to paying for things like Medicare for All or a Green New Deal is, how are we going to pay for it? Well, how are you going to pay for that? Well, look, to be fair, there are a lot of studies out there that show that Medicare for All actually costs less. So actually, if you were to implement a Medicare for All system, you'd be saving money. But okay, the Green New Deal is definitely going to cost money, right? And free college, you're going to see some investment here, right? Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez this weekend decided to answer that question when she was asked, and conservative heads have imploded because of it. Now, when she was on 60 Minutes, she pointed out, when asked by Anderson Cooper, how are we going to pay for these situations, right? How are we going to pay for these policies that you're putting forward? Well, for one, we actually had really high tax rates back in the 1960s and 70s that she was pointing that out. But the other thing I was going to mention is that she said, well, how are we going to pay for Space Force? How are we going to pay for military spending? Well, you know what? We'll pay for these policies the same way we pay for those things. So why is it that we only have this conversation when it comes to healthcare or education? And that's what she said. Now, here's the thing, right? What she and the reason that she brings up these tax brackets is that it turns out that if you tax rich people, you end up actually having more resources to be able to pay for other things. Weird, I know, right? Now, taxing the rich is actually an incredibly popular proposal among regular people. Now, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll conducted last year, they found that 53% of adults strongly agree that the wealthiest Americans should pay higher tax rates. An additional 23% somewhat agree that the wealthiest should pay higher taxes. So overall, over 3/4 of Americans say, let's tax the rich. They need to have higher tax rates. Now, those higher tax rates in the past were up to 70, sometimes 90%. Now, of course, rich people don't agree with that. At least a lot of them. There are some that actually do agree with that. One of them happens to be Nick Hanauer. And there's also a group called Patriotic Millionaires that say, oh, no, actually, maybe you should tax me more. Not maybe, you should absolutely tax me more. Because this is money that we don't actually need, right? But there are many in conservative circles that basically don't agree, and they pay people to say things like this. Now, I'm going to read you a tweet here from Steve Scalise, whose head basically exploded after AOC had mentioned that we're going to raise your tax rates, or we want to raise your tax rates. He said, Republicans, let Americans keep more of their hard income money. Democrats, take away 70% of your income and give it to a leftist fantasy programs. I have to mention that Medicare for All is not a fantasy program. Single-payer healthcare is basically a part of every OECD country. So we're one of the only modern industrialized countries that doesn't actually have a single-payer universal healthcare system. So we're the odd man out. And the only one that is so barbaric that we allow people to continue to go broke over healthcare. But anyway, now, you also have Stuart Varney. Now, Stuart Varney is also a rich person. He works for Fox News, and he went on Fox and Friends and said this.
Taxed at 90%, why bother?
Did the gentleman refer to a fair share?
Yes.
A fair share is 90% for the government and maybe 10% kept by you? That hardly seems fair to me. Looks to 2 points. Looks to me like, number one, the far left is now calling the shots for the entire Democrat Party as you roll up towards 2020.
At least so two of the bigger names.
Okay.
Well, what's the sense of working
But they're
hard,
they're making all of the headlines. They're making all of the running. And Nancy Pelosi constantly has to talk about whether she's going to go with this or with that. The far left is making the running. And that's very dangerous for America.
it's very dangerous that not only we have people who are left wing that are starting to have inroads in the Democratic Party, and I don't agree with them. I don't think that progressive voices have drowned out and have taken power in the party, although they have certainly made a lot of inroads, as I said before. But it's so dangerous for America. Well, no, it's so dangerous to go back to tax rates that we had historically had in the past during a time of great prosperity. Oh, I know who it's dangerous for. It's dangerous for you because you don't want to pay any extra. Now, here's the thing about that. Again, there's no context here because we're talking about marginal tax rates. See, here's the thing, the framing here. And by the way, I love the whole fact that the panel, nobody on that panel makes less than $1 million a year. So here you have millionaires saying, oh, a tax on millionaires is such a horrible thing. Well, you're going to be personally affected. I think you have a little bit of a bias. But again, the framing, 90% of it is being kept by the government and only 10% being kept by you. Well, look, for one, that's only anything over $10 million a year. And they weren't even talking about 70%. AOC was talking about, wasn't about 90%. AOC was talking about 70%. Julian Castro brought up the fact that historically we even had a 90% rate, but generally he was more in favor of AOC's 70%. So again, they take this out of context and they say, well, Democrats, all the Democrats believe in 90% taxes on all of you. But that's not true. Unless they're talking to a room full of millionaires, that's not true at all. And of course, it would have to be people making over $10 million a year because that's how marginal taxes work, right? Again, so look, again, Republicans want you to think that they're going to be taxing regular people, regular working people at 70%. That's insanity. That's not true at all. This is a marginal tax rate, right? Which means the cap is $10 million, right? So you make $10 million. Anything over that is taxed at 70%. That's how marginal tax rates work, right? Now, how many people would be affected by that tax? 1 million, 2 million, 40 million? No, 16,000. 16,000 Americans earn $10 million or more a year. This would affect 16,000 people total. Now, the money raised from that would actually benefit millions of people. I don't know. I think that sounds pretty fair. Just saying. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, she fired back at Steve Scalise, and she said, "You're the GOP minority whip. How do you not know how marginal tax rates work?" Well, that's the thing. They do understand how it works, but their whole purpose is to mislead you. Now she adds, almost forgot, GOP works for the corporate CEO showering themselves in multi-million-dollar bonuses, not the actual working people whose wages plus healthcare they're ripping off for profit. And that is why I love AOC. The clackbacks are real, and they're actually based in facts. People who are against raising taxes on the very wealthy are either very wealthy themselves or have been misled. They have fallen for the conservative fear-mongering on taxes and don't understand marginal rates. The idea that the government will tax everyone at 70%, again, you know what ironically that would be? If the government taxed everybody at 70%, that would literally be a flat tax. Wait, who's the party that's actually out there advocating for a flat tax? I think it was a Republican Party. I think it was Paul Ryan talking about how we need a flat tax. Now, of course, their flat tax would be 10% or 15%, right? Well, that would mean millionaires and billionaires would be paying a tax rate of 15%. Now, obviously, that is a regressive tax because if you're poor and you're paying 15%, you're paying a larger share of your income than rich people are, right? And again, while rich people will be paying more money, the share of their income going to the federal government will obviously be far less than somebody who makes $30,000 a year. So that's important context. That's why the flat tax is a scam. Now, what you have here, of course, are Republicans falsely claiming that AOC and the Democrats want a high flat tax on everybody, where in reality, we are actually for a progressive tax, meaning the more you make, the more you will get charged. And of course, marginal rates, if you make more than $10 million a year, anything over 10 million will end up being taxed at a higher rate than anything under 10 million. So, but the thing is that this is not given context on purpose. Now, the truth be told, the years that conservatives say they want to go back to, the 1950s and 60s and 40s, the greatest generation, right? Those times, they heavily taxed the rich. That's when tax rates were in the 70s to 90%. Now, the times where we had severe economic problems, the 20s and 30s, the time right before the Great Depression, that's when tax rates were historically low. And then, of course, after Reagan, and then before the Great Recession, tax rates have also been historically low on the wealthy. So we have lots of recessions and depressions whenever taxes on the rich are super low, but have periods of enormous economic growth and prosperity when tax rates on the wealthy are really high. I'm sure there's a pattern in there somewhere. I'm sure that you can glean some information from that would be very useful in determining effective tax policy. That's if you actually cared about tax policy. But hey, on that vein, if you want to go back to the good old days, well then, you should be in favor of soaking the rich. Whereas most of, 75%, over 75% of Americans are in favor of that. It's just unfortunate that our representation is the rich, and they don't represent us. And so they will end up benefiting themselves with lower tax rates. So that's the reality here. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.